Every minute of every day, countless big rigs crisscross this nation, their drivers pushing through exhaustion, isolation, and conditions that most of us will never experience. They are the eyes of the night, witnessing phenomena we can barely imagine, encountering entities we pray remain confined to legend. And sometimes, just sometimes, the road claims them in ways that defy all logic. What you're about to hear are three meticulously documented accounts, each confirmed through police reports, local news archives, and corroborated eyewitness testimonies. These aren't campfire tales. These are real events that pierce the veil of reality for ordinary truckers, leaving scars that time can't heal. And in some cases, the shadows they encountered still linger, waiting.
Let's dim the lights and ease into our first story, a chilling encounter that still sends cold shivers down the spine of veteran trucker Frankie the Fox Marino. Frankie earned his nickname for his legendary ability to navigate the trickiest routes and sniff out any trouble on the road. For over 2 decades, he'd seen it all: blizzards, black ice, desperate hitchhikers, even the occasional run-in with a bear. Nothing, he swore, could genuinely shake him. His reputation as cool-headed and unflappable was about to be put to the ultimate test on a stretch of road known ominously as the loneliest road in America, U.S. Highway 50 in Nevada. It was late autumn in 2018, and Frankie was on a routine haul of construction equipment from Salt Lake City to Reno. He was making good time, pushing through the vast, empty expanse of central Nevada. The moon, a sliver of silver in the ink-black sky, cast long, distorted shadows across the desert landscape. It was just past 2 a.m. when he reached the most desolate part of Highway 50, a place where civilization felt like a distant memory, swallowed by the sheer scale of the wilderness. The air was crisp, carrying the faint, metallic scent of sagebrush and dust. Frankie had his windows down a crack, enjoying the biting night air. His only companion, the low rumble of his diesel engine and the occasional crackle of static from his CB. That's when he first saw them in his rearview mirror. 2 distinct sets of headlights, low to the ground, moving with an unsettling speed. They appeared suddenly, seemingly materializing out of the darkness behind him. No initial distant glow, just there. Frankie, ever cautious, glanced at his speedometer. He was doing a steady 70 miles per hour, well within the limit. Yet these lights were gaining on him, fast. He assumed it was a couple of speed demon cars, perhaps racing through the night. But as they closed the distance, the pattern of the lights became clearer. It wasn't 2 cars, it was a single vehicle, and those distinct lower-set lights were unmistakably the auxiliary lights of a motorcycle, flanking a central, brighter beam. And the vehicle itself was moving with the eerie silence of something that shouldn't be traveling at that speed. Frankie, a seasoned rider himself in his younger days, initially admired the rider's daring. He moved slightly to the right, giving them plenty of room to pass. But the vehicle didn't pass. Instead, it pulled directly alongside his driver's side, maintaining a perfectly synchronized speed, its silence deafening against the roar of his truck. Frankie craned his neck, trying to get a look at the driver, but the motorcycle was shrouded in an unearthly glow, a faint, almost phosphorescent aura that seemed to absorb the light from his truck's headlights. He couldn't make out any details, only a blurred, indistinct figure hunched over the handlebars. A chill, far colder than the desert night air, snaked down Frankie's spine. This wasn't right. No motorcycle, no matter how powerful, could maintain this kind of pace, this kind of perfect, unwavering alignment with a loaded semi for this long without a sound beyond the wind. He instinctively tried his CB. "Hey, bike beside me. You copy? Everything all right?" Only the crackle of static answered. He tried another channel, then another. Nothing. The entire band was dead, as if the airwaves themselves had gone silent just for him. A strange, acrid smell began to seep into the cab, faint at first, then growing stronger, like ozone mixed with something rotten, something ancient and burnt. The motorcycle, still pacing him, now started to drift closer, its ethereal glow intensifying, momentarily blinding him in his side mirror. Frankie felt a primal surge of fear. He stomped on the accelerator, pushing his rig past 80 miles per hour, then 90, the tires humming a desperate tune against the asphalt. He risked a glance in his mirror. The motorcycle was still there, effortlessly matching his speed, the blurred figure seemingly leaning into the impossible turns of his desperate sprint. Suddenly, the motorcycle veered directly into his lane, cutting him off, forcing him to slam on his brakes. The air filled with the screech of tortured rubber, and his rig jackknifed slightly before he wrestled it back under control. When he looked up, gasping for breath, the motorcycle was gone. Vanished. Just the long, empty road stretching out before him.
Frankie, heart pounding against his ribs, pulled over to the shoulder, shaking uncontrollably. He grabbed his phone to call for help, but there was no signal, just like the CB. He was truly alone. As he sat there, trying to regain his composure, he noticed something in his rearview mirror. Far back, a tiny pinprick of light, growing steadily larger. It was the motorcycle, and this time it wasn't just one. As it drew closer, the single light resolved into 3 distinct motorcycles riding abreast, their glowing auras pulsing rhythmically. They stopped about 50 yards behind his truck, their engines silent, yet their lights burning with an intensity that hurt his eyes. Frankie could now make out the forms more clearly. They weren't just motorcycles, they were police motorcycles with old-fashioned sidecars. And the figures riding them, they weren't wearing modern uniforms. They had high-collared jackets, old-style helmets, and goggles. As the lead motorcycle approached, gliding silently forward until it was just a few feet from his cab, Frankie got a clear look at the rider. His face was a skeletal mask, skin like dried parchment stretched taut over bone, eyes burning with a cold, malevolent blue light from deep within the empty sockets. His uniform was tattered, singed, and there was a jagged, gaping hole in the side of his helmet. The phantom officers slowly raised a bony hand, pointing a finger directly at Frankie. A voice like gravel being dragged across a tombstone rasped, "You're speeding, driver, and you've got a blowout coming." Frankie's blood ran cold. He hadn't noticed anything wrong with his tires, but as he looked down at his dashboard, his tire pressure light, which had been off, flickered to life, then turned solid red for his rear passenger side tire. Just then, from the opposite direction, a bright, normal set of headlights appeared, growing rapidly. A real Nevada State Trooper cruiser, its emergency lights cutting through the silence of the desert. As the trooper's headlights swept over the scene, Frankie watched in disbelief as the 3 glowing police motorcycles shimmered, then dissolved like smoke, leaving nothing but the empty road behind his truck. The trooper pulled up, emergency lights flashing, illuminating Frankie's pale, sweat-soaked face. "Everything okay here, driver?" the trooper asked, his voice firm but concerned.
Frankie stammered out his story, pointing to the empty spot where the motorcycles had been. The trooper listened patiently, then walked to the back of Frankie's rig. He shone his flashlight on the rear passenger tire. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. "Looks like you've got a sidewall split about to blow. Good thing you pulled over." Frankie stared at the tire, then back at the empty road. "Officer," he said, "have you ever heard of phantom motorcycle cops out here?" The trooper sighed, a weary expression on his face. "Only every now and then, especially around this stretch. Back in the 70s, there was a terrible accident. 3 state troopers on motorcycles, part of a special highway patrol unit, went missing during a dust storm right around here. They were chasing a speeder, went off the road, never found the bikes, never found the bodies, just vanished. Local legend says they're still out here, trying to enforce the law, trying to finish their last chase." Frankie Marino replaced his tire and eventually completed his delivery, but he now goes hundreds of miles out of his way to avoid US Highway 50. The image of those glowing skeletal riders, especially the one pointing at his tire, is seared into his memory. The Nevada State Police officially lists those 3 troopers as presumed lost in the line of duty. But unverified internal logs, whispered about among some older dispatchers, contain reports of phantom traffic stops and unexplained visual disturbances on Highway 50, particularly at night. Frankie swears he's not alone. He occasionally exchanges cryptic messages on a private trucker forum with others who've seen the Highway 50 patrol. They share stories, not of dread, but of a strange, chilling gratitude. The Phantom Patrol, it seems, might be terrifying, but they're still doing their job, warning truckers of dangers, perhaps even saving lives, in their own spectral way.
This account comes from Lena Petrova, a meticulous and highly organized long-haul driver who prided herself on her perfect safety record and infallible navigation skills. For 10 years, Lena had crisscrossed the country, her truck an extension of her own disciplined mind, her routes mapped out with precision, her GPS a trusted co-pilot. She knew every shortcut, every bypass, every sleepy town a trucker might need. Or so she thought. It was a humid, oppressive July night in 2022. Lena was transporting a delicate load of medical supplies from Atlanta to Houston, a time-sensitive delivery that required her to maintain a tight schedule. She was making excellent progress, well ahead of her estimated arrival, when she hit an unexpected snag just outside Shreveport, Louisiana. Interstate 20 was completely shut down due to a massive chemical spill, the kind that warranted a full-scale hazardous materials response. The detour signs, hastily erected and barely legible in the dim light, directed traffic onto a secondary state highway, promising a quick reroute that would eventually connect back to the interstate. Lena had never taken this particular detour before, but her GPS confirmed the route. It was a longer path, adding about 60 miles, but given the severity of the closure, it seemed the only viable option. What she didn't realize, and what her outdated GPS couldn't account for, was that recent local flooding and subsequent road projects had rendered much of this detour a maze of forgotten paths. New residential developments had sprung up, diverting ancient roads, while others had simply been abandoned, swallowed by the encroaching swampy wilderness. The feeling of unease began subtly. The state highway soon dwindled into a narrow county road, then a single-lane asphalt strip, bordered on both sides by a wall of dense, dripping cypress trees and murky, stagnant water. The air grew thick with the smell of damp earth, and something else, something cloyingly sweet and faintly metallic, like old blood. Her GPS, which had been faithfully guiding her, suddenly began to flicker, then froze, displaying only a blank screen with "signal lost."
Her CB radio, usually buzzing with chatter, emitted nothing but a soft, incessant hiss like a snake breathing. As the miles stretched on, the road became even narrower, unlined, and poorly maintained. Overhanging branches scraped against the roof of her trailer, and the humid air inside her cab grew heavy. Lena tried to turn back, but the road was too tight for her rig to maneuver. She needed a wide pull-off or an intersection. But the intersections she encountered were just muddy tracks disappearing into the impenetrable swamp, marked only by sagging hand-painted signs with faded, unreadable names. Then a chilling pattern began to emerge. She started seeing them, small, hand-carved wooden effigies tied to trees, grotesque figures with crude faces and limbs made of twisted branches, wrapped in scraps of dirty white cloth. At first, she dismissed them as peculiar local folk art, but their number increased, spaced at unnervingly precise intervals, always facing the road, their blank faces seemingly watching her. And then she passed it. A rusted, abandoned school bus, half submerged in the swamp water, its windows like empty eyesores. 10 minutes later, she passed it again. And then again. Lena's odometer showed she'd driven over 90 miles since losing her GPS signal, yet she was clearly driving in a loop. The effigies, the abandoned bus, even a distinctive gnarled oak tree draped in Spanish moss. They kept repeating, mocking her attempts to escape. Panic began to set in. This wasn't a navigational error. This was something else. The landscape itself felt alive, malevolent, deliberately trapping her. The swamp seemed to press in, the trees forming an impenetrable wall, their shadows shifting and lengthening into distorted figures in her peripheral vision. Determined to find an exit, Lena continued. The road twisted and turned, each bend revealing the same oppressive scenery. That's when she saw the lights in the distance. Not headlights, but a cluster of flickering yellow glows, like old lanterns, emanating from a clearing ahead. Relief washed over her. A house, people, directions. She pushed forward, her heart pounding with desperate hope. As she drew closer, the scene that revealed itself made her blood run cold. It wasn't a house. It was a collection of dilapidated shacks, cobbled together from warped wood and rusted tin, clustered around a central fire pit. The flickering lights came from lanterns, hanging precariously from rotting porch beams, and gathered around the fire, illuminated by its sickly glow, were figures. Dozens of them. They were small, gaunt, and moved with a jerky, unnatural gait. Their clothes were rags, caked with mud and what looked like dried swamp muck. As Lena slowed her truck to a crawl, trying to observe without drawing attention, she saw their faces. They were pale, almost translucent, with hollowed eyes that seemed too large for their emaciated skulls. Their mouths were stretched into wide, unsettling smiles, revealing rows of small, pointed teeth. They didn't seem to notice her at first, consumed by some silent ritual around the fire, their movements a disturbing mimicry of human dance. Lena knew, with a certainty that froze her to the core, that these were not people she could ask for directions. She slowly, carefully, began to back up, intending to turn her massive rig around in the wider clearing around the shacks. But as she engaged reverse, the subtle shift of her truck's engine seemed to alert them. One of the figures, a particularly tall, reedy individual with a head that seemed to tilt at an unnatural angle, slowly turned its face towards her, its smile widened, stretching impossibly. Then it pointed a long, bony finger directly at her truck. As if on cue, the other figures around the fire stopped their macabre dance. All of them, in unison, slowly turned, their large, empty eyes fixed on Lena's truck. And then they began to move. Not running, but a swift, gliding motion like water spirits flowing silently towards her. Their smiles never left their faces, growing wider, more predatory. Lena threw the truck into drive, flooring the accelerator. Her rig roared forward, kicking up mud and gravel, the figures scattering like startled insects. But as she sped past the clearing, she heard a sound that would haunt her nightmares. Not screams, but a chorus of high-pitched, childish giggles echoing from the depths of the swamp behind her. She drove wildly, tearing through the winding road, the laughter seeming to follow her, echoing from the trees. Her truck's dashboard lights began to flicker, the engine sputtering, losing power. She could smell the metallic scent again, stronger now, like a fresh wound. Just as the engine began to die, she saw it. A single, faded sign, barely visible through the overgrowth, reading Exit 20. With a final desperate surge, the truck lurched forward and she burst onto a brightly lit interstate, its familiar hum a symphony to her ears. Her GPS immediately reconnected, chirping, "Welcome back to Interstate 20." The CB crackled to life with normal trucker chatter. The air in her cab suddenly cleared, the sickly sweet smell gone. Lena pulled into the nearest truck stop, shaking. She contacted the Louisiana State Police, recounting her terrifying detour. The dispatcher listened patiently, with a strange note in his voice. "Ma'am, we get reports like that now and then. Folks who get lost on what they call Old Creek Road. But there ain't no Old Creek Road around Shreveport anymore. Not on any map. That whole area, what was once called Millwood Bayou, was flooded out completely in the 90s. There was a small, isolated community there. Folks lived off the land, kept to themselves. They refused to evacuate even when the waters rose. They just disappeared with the flood. The official story is they drowned or were washed away. But some of the old-timers, they say different. They say some things just don't like to be disturbed." Lena investigated Millwood Bayou when she got home. Old newspaper articles confirmed the remote community and their refusal to leave before a catastrophic flood. There were also vague, unconfirmed reports of strange folk practices and unusual appearances associated with the community before its disappearance. Lena never takes detours now. She carries 3 separate GPS units and detailed, physical paper maps that she updates herself. She's also discovered an online network of Lost Road Truckers, a clandestine group that shares coordinates of roads that simply shouldn't exist, roads that lure drivers into loops, roads that house their own unique horrors. And sometimes Lena finds herself checking her mirrors, convinced she sees the faint outline of a crudely carved wooden effigy.
The most disturbing element of Lena's story isn't just the encounter, but the peculiar souvenir she found. 2 days after her ordeal, while cleaning out her cab, she found it tucked away in her glove compartment. A small, crudely carved wooden effigy, identical to the ones she'd seen tied to the trees. It smelled faintly of swamp water and something else, something cloyingly sweet, like rot. On its base, scrawled in an ancient, almost unrecognizable dialect with 3 words, which a retired linguistics professor she consulted hesitantly translated as, "You are home." Lena immediately burned the effigy, but a week later, she found a similar, newly carved one tied to the antenna of her truck. She now finds a new one every few weeks, sometimes in her truck, sometimes on her doorstep, always subtly different, always smelling of the swamp. It's a persistent, chilling reminder that some detours don't end when you find the main road again.
This is the terrifying experience of Marcus Thorne, a typically pragmatic and no-nonsense driver who had been hauling oversized loads for over 15 years. His rig was his sanctuary, and his CB radio, A vintage Cobra 29 was his lifeline, a constant companion through countless lonely miles, a source of gossip, warnings, and comforting human chatter. He trusted it implicitly. It was early spring in 2020, and Marcus was on a cross-country run, transporting specialized aerospace components from Seattle to a testing facility in Southern California. He was pushing through the desolate lunar landscape of the Mojave Desert, somewhere west of Barstow, around 11 p.m. The vast starry sky was his only witness, and the silence of the desert was profound, broken only by the hum of his tires and the occasional burst of static from his beloved CB. Suddenly, the static wasn't just static. A voice, clear and distinct, cut through the white noise on Channel 19. "Eastbound heavy hauler, that's you, in the blue Peterbilt. This is your warning. There's a soft shoulder at mile marker 217. Your passenger side dolly wheel is about to drop off the asphalt if you don't adjust your line." Marcus instinctively glanced in his mirrors. Nothing. The highway was a dark, empty ribbon stretching behind him. He was indeed in a blue Peterbilt, hauling a significant load. But how could anyone see him so clearly when there was no other visible traffic? Yet the warning felt urgent. He adjusted his trajectory, pulling slightly to the left, and felt the distinct thud-thud of his oversized dolly wheel narrowly missing the crumbled edge of the asphalt. A soft shoulder, just as the voice had said. A shiver of unease ran down his spine. This wasn't a standard bear-in-the-air warning from a fellow trucker. The precision was unnerving. He keyed his mic. "Hey, whoever that was, this is the blue Peterbilt. Appreciate the heads up. That was a close one. Who is this? I don't see anyone out here." The response came immediately, the voice chillingly devoid of emotion, flat and resonant, as if it originated from a space without air. "My name is irrelevant, driver. You may call me Static Man, and I see everything on these airwaves. Your front left brake caliper is overheating. You'll need to pull over soon, or you'll warp your rotor." Marcus's jaw tightened. He'd done a pre-trip inspection just hours ago. He glanced at his gauges. Sure enough, the brake temperature for his front left was slowly but steadily climbing. This was impossible. Predicting a sidewall bulge was one thing, but knowing a specific brake caliper was silently overheating without any visual cues. He pulled over at the next safe spot, a wide, empty pull-off. As he stepped out, the desert night air was still and warm. He carefully approached his front left wheel, pulling out his infrared thermometer. He pointed it at the caliper. The reading flashed 350 degrees F, steadily rising. It was indeed overheating, on the verge of warping the rotor. Marcus, a seasoned mechanic himself, was flummoxed. There were no warning lights, no smell, no smoke. How could Static Man know? As Marcus meticulously worked on cooling down the brake, spraying it with water, and inspecting the line, the voice returned, unbidden, over his CB, which he had left on in the cab. It sounded as if it were speaking directly into his ear, even though the microphone was still in the cab. "Your daughter, Sarah, she's having trouble with her calculus homework. She's stuck on page 87, problem 4, the one about the derivatives." Marcus froze. Sarah. Calculus. He'd spoken to her just that morning, and she had indeed grumbled about a particularly tough calculus problem. How could this voice, miles out in the Mojave, know that? He scrambled back into his cab, grabbing the mic. "Who are you? How do you know about my daughter?" "I told you," Static Man replied, his voice still flat, emotionless. "I am the static. I am the silence between the words. I am the airwaves themselves. I hear all. I see all, through the frequencies." Then the voice began to list off details from his life, his wife's favorite flower, lilies.
the exact brand of coffee he drank, the old injury he had in his left knee, even the specific model of the old pickup truck that he'd been restoring in his garage for years. It wasn't menacing, not exactly, but it was profoundly, invasively unsettling. You are worried about the new freight company taking over your usual routes. Don't be. Their bid was rejected this afternoon. You'll be fine. Marcus hadn't even heard about that freight company's bid yet. It was too new. He switched off his CB. The silence in the cab was deafening. He felt exposed, violated. He restarted his truck, pulled back onto the highway, and drove for an hour in tense silence, his eyes darting to the CB every few minutes. He tried turning it back on, but it was just dead air. No static, no chatter, nothing. He hoped Static Man was gone. The next morning, after delivering his load, Marcus called his wife. "Hey, how's Sarah doing with her calculus?" he asked, trying to sound casual. His wife laughed. "Oh, she was pulling her hair out over problem 4 on page 87 last night, but she finally got it this morning." Marcus's blood ran cold. The details were exact. That week, Marcus took his Cobra 29 to 3 different CB repair shops. All of them found it to be in perfect working order. No glitches, no strange modifications, no hidden frequencies. One mechanic, an old-timer who'd been working with CBs for decades, looked at Marcus with a knowing glint in his eye. "Some channels, son," he said, "they're not just about radio waves. They're about connections. Things out there, they ride the air. Sometimes they listen back." Marcus Thorne never fully recovered from his encounter with the Static Man. He still drives, but his Cobra 29 now sits silent in his cab, rarely turned on. He's installed satellite radio and uses a cell phone for communication, preferring the tangible, limited signals of technology over the boundless, unnerving reach of the airwaves. He's also changed his online presence, becoming meticulously private. Yet sometimes, late at night, when he's alone, on a particularly isolated stretch of highway, he swears he can hear a faint, almost imperceptible hiss on his silent CB, a whisper of static that seems to know his every thought. The most chilling revelation about Marcus's encounter isn't what he heard, but what happened months later. After his experience, Marcus began researching other truckers who reported unusual CB incidents. He stumbled upon an old, obscure online forum, largely inactive, dedicated to phantom broadcasts. Tucked away in a thread from 2005, he found a post from a driver named Whisperwind, detailing an identical encounter with a voice that knew personal details and claimed to be the Static. The driver mentioned a specific phrase the voice had used. "The frequencies are a two-way mirror." Marcus had never heard that phrase during his own encounter, but 2 weeks after reading the post, his old, unused Cobra 29, sitting cold in his cab, suddenly crackled to life. A flat, resonant voice filled the silence. "The frequencies are a two-way mirror, Marcus, and now you've looked back." The CB then went dead again, this time permanently. He now understands that some connections, once made, can never truly be severed, and some whispers from the void are not just heard, but remembered.